Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily News. I'm Nicholas Richardson. The bills are crushing Poles. Most want to give up new clothes and entertainment. The amount of debts taken out from loan companies in October increased by almost half compared to last year. This is especially dangerous because of the high interest rates that have to be paid. What does the Polish government say about this? On top of all that, record debt is looming. How hard will people living in Poland have to tighten their belts?
1 billion and 40 million zloty is the total amount of loans taken out by Poles in October this year alone. This is almost half as much again as a year ago. So much that the Poles in power today in the election campaign promised that the price tag would disappear. What has happened? Today I'm taking a closer look at the situation. I think that when you took 100 zloty a few months ago, you could buy something for it, and now you buy a little something and you've already spent it all. There is no revalorization or compensation, even when it comes to the rate of inflation. Donald Tusk promised Poles prosperity before the elections. There are ways and methods to fight effectively against high prices. As I said, the government can lie, TV can lie, but the numbers don't lie. And in fact, the numbers speak for themselves. People can no longer afford current payments. Loan companies in October 2024 granted cash loans of 1.39 billion zloty, 44.6% more than a year earlier, according to data from the Credit Information Bureau. This is very bad news. The danger of such companies is that the consumer doesn't really know how much of the borrowed money to pay back because the worst lurks in the fine print. If someone goes to a loan company, it means that they most likely left with a receipt from the bank. Therefore, it is a fatal signal to all of us that society is getting poorer quickly. Prices, of course, are rising the whole time. So Poles have tightened their belts. But according to the head of the Ministry of Finance, it's good that Poles have less money to spend because they will be able to save more. High interest rates persist, prompting Poles to save a little more, buy a little less in stores, except that there is no money to save. More than half of Poles say that if the cost of living makes them unable to pay their high bills, they will cut spending primarily on entertainment, as well as on clothing and shoes, according to a survey by the National Debt Register. But according to the Minister of Climate and Environment, Paulina Henning-Kloska, textiles, from the point of view of the climate, it's even good if we buy less of this kind of stuff, because it causes emissions. The situation of the Polish economy is saved by the Poles themselves, who know that they need to tighten their belts, but in order to have more money, they need to work more. First and foremost, people know how to work and want to work, and they contribute to the fact that economic growth is not negative as it is in Germany, but positive. However, this pace is weakening, and here is the danger, a weakening pace of GDP, not so much rising inflation, but inflation that is not decreasing. Poles' debt, both private and public, is growing. Record debt is already taking its toll on the healthcare system. Money is missing for investment. What is happening with this budget, this year, next year? Though we have a gigantic indebtedness of Poland with a huge budget deficit accumulated in these 2 years of 500 billion zloty, which we have never seen in the history of the Third Polish Republic, and all these development programs are not there. The budget bill for 2025, which the Sejm is working on, projects that next year's deficit will reach an astronomical level of nearly 289 billion zloty.
This is the 8th night of protests in the Georgian capital, Tbilisi, spurred on by the authorities' decision to abandon its course towards European integration. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people are taking to the streets of Tbilisi because they do not want to be part of the Russian sphere of influence. The country's authorities have detained more than 300 demonstrators and the number of injured exceeds 200. Police arrested 2 opposition party leaders, one of whom was severely beaten during the arrest. Our special correspondent, Alexander Wyjewski, was on the scene.
Despite the street protests, the Georgian authorities are unwilling to back down. Prime Minister Irakli Kovakidze accused the European Union of blackmail, but paraphrasing Donald Tusk, most likely unknowingly, said that the purpose of the arrests is not repression, but the prevention of crime. Yesterday, the Georgian authorities began to abide by the law as they understand it and have arrested 2 parliamentary opposition party politicians. Head of the opposition Coalition for Change party, was detained by the police. The footage shows the politician losing consciousness, possibly as a result of a beating. He was then led by his arms and legs and dragged into a police car. 48-year-old Nika Gvaramia was a close associate of President Mikhail Saakashvili and the Minister of Justice. Other opposition politicians were also detained, among them Aleko Elisashvili, leader of the Strong Georgia Party and leader of the Dafioni Youth Protest Movement. According to agency information, at least 6 opposition members have been arrested. The arrests were condemned today by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, calling them cruel and unjust. The protests have been going on for a week. They are mainly attended by 20 and 30-year-olds who are horrified that their country is abandoning its pro-Western course.
And 2 days ago, I got chased at 4 a.m. with from like a little on an alley. From the back, from nowhere, I heard somebody hit my head. It was like a policeman. And thank God that I had a helmet. And now they are banning helmets also. They're banning helmets, gas masks, and any type of equipment that may prevent us from their bullets, their fists, and everything. So they want to destroy us and take us to crumbles.
The message is very clear. Everybody here was born under free Georgia, a democratic Georgia, and we understand that until we fight till the finish, which is having the fundamental values of the West, which is democracy, fair government, fair judges, we're not going anywhere. This tyrannical rule that comes from the North, from many, many centuries ago, has always been a nightmare for us, and everybody standing here wants one thing: freedom and peace, and we will never let propaganda take that away from us. Thank you, everybody in the West that is watching right now, that is listening. Please stand by Georgia at this time, because we do not want to be in the shackles of the northern dictator that is trying to take us away at this point.
On Tuesday night, police launched an assault on the protesters, but the demonstrations did not stop. Demonstrators covered the walls of the building with inscriptions vilifying both those in power and their Moscow allies. In addition to uncensored shouts, there were also improvised bonfires. All this increasingly resembling the atmosphere of Kiev's Maidan a decade ago.
Calls for the president's resignation, the spectre of an economic crisis, and an anxious market. France has been without a government since last night. For the first time in more than half a century, the French Parliament passed a vote of no confidence in Prime Minister Michel Barnier. The political earthquake on the Seine could be felt across Europe.
It's not a shake-up, it's a total disaster. For the first time since the 1960s, the French Parliament has thrown out the Prime Minister. Following the adoption of the motion, and in accordance with Article 50 of the Constitution, the Prime Minister must submit the resignation of the government to the President of the Republic. The National Assembly is adjourned, and the session is closed. And so, Michel Barnier became not only the first dismissed head of government in decades, but also the shortest-serving Prime Minister in French history. What should Emmanuel Macron do? There is only one person who knows the answer, and that is Emmanuel Macron. We have seen that he was in no hurry to appoint Michel Barnier as Prime Minister, and now he has made it clear that he wants to act quickly. At stake is not only political stability, but above all, the French economy. The main point of contention that led to the no-confidence vote was the dispute over the budget proposal. We will see an attempt by President Macron to appoint another Prime Minister, and the opposition will become louder and louder in demanding that it is President Macron who should resign as soon as possible, in order to call not even parliamentary, but presidential elections. The problem is that after this year's elections in France, no one has a stable majority in parliament. The left won the most votes, but not enough to form a government. The center and the right have just quarreled over the budget bill.
France has no prime minister, no government, and no budget after a historic no-confidence vote in parliament here. Prime Minister Michel Barnier just submitted his resignation here in the presidential palace to President Emmanuel Macron. There are growing calls for Macron himself to step down, but he's been insisting, including in recent days, that he will serve out until the end of his term in 2027.
The task of forming a new government will therefore have to include significant changes to the draft budget in order to win over key factions of the ruling coalition. The former Prime Minister's proposals were mainly unacceptable to the right-wing parties.
Ce qui est certain, c'est que le choix que nous avons fait,
It is clear that we made a responsible choice, because we could not pass a budget that included 40 billion euros in additional taxes in a country that already has record mandatory tax payments. At the same time, and perhaps surprisingly, the organization of new presidential and legislative elections is being pushed mainly by the left. Even Macron's right-wing rival, Marine Le Pen, speaks cautiously of the possibility of speeding up the election. I think there will come a time when, if we don't go down the road of respect for voters and respect for political forces and respect for elections, then of course the pressure on the president will increase. But only he will be able to make the decision. He is the one who has the final word. The pressure will come primarily from public opinion, and that will stem directly from the country's economic turmoil. The markets are already reacting to this political turbulence. Any delay in working on the budget could lead to panic and crisis. It seems that these problems on the financial side are yet to come for Europe, as the shakiness of the French and German markets will not only affect the Eurozone, although it will be felt there more, but also other remaining banks in European countries. In addition to domestic pressures, there are also international pressures. With the political crisis in Germany and the future of transatlantic cooperation uncertain with the new administration in the White House, Macron had a plan to emerge as the new leader of Europe. But with the chaos in his own political backyard, it will be difficult for him to convince Europe of his vision for a new common policy.
Things are becoming more and more restless in the Middle East, which has plunged into chaos and violence. In Syria, rebels have seized another strategic town, Hama, after a 5-day battle with sorry, can we do that again? My mistake. Hopeless, really. Things are getting more and more restless in the Middle East, which is plunged into chaos and violence. In Syria, rebels have seized another strategic town, Hama, after a 5-day battle with Assad's Syrian army. Let's recall that the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah has been in effect for only 1 week.
The situation in Syria is becoming more precarious by the day. After Aleppo, the rebels have now taken control of the city of Hama. This is despite a promised counteroffensive by the Syrian army. At the moment, any scenario seems possible and escalation highly likely, given the Syrian state's involvement in the fight against terrorist groups and the actions of neighboring countries. Uncertainty is growing in Damascus, the country's capital. Successive rebel victories show the weakness of the Assad government and its main ally, Russia, which either cannot or will not effectively support the Syrian army. We have been living here for years in constant fear and extreme terror. The only thing left for us is to pray to God and ask Him to protect our country and bear our problems. Everyone is afraid. We live in fear and anxiety of what will happen next, how the situation will develop, where it will take us. The situation is being closely watched by Syria's neighbors, including Lebanon, which would likely face another huge wave of migrants if the conflict worsens, and Israel, which fears for its security. A situation in which another country on Israel's border becomes unstable is worrying. We must be prepared for all eventualities, including the fall of the Assad regime and the emergence of terrorist groups that will pose a new threat to Israel. And that threat is the chemical weapons possessed by the Syrian military and used during the country's brutal civil war, as has been widely reported by the Israeli press. Israel is worried that, having seized control of military sites belonging to the Assad regime, all this at a time when the situation in the Middle East seemed to be calming down, at least temporarily, after a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah and increasingly clear prospects for peace in the Gaza Strip. The war in Ukraine has overshadowed these Middle Eastern issues. We have Syria, we have Lebanon, which is so important. It used to be the Switzerland of the Middle East, but as a result of the war, it has received 2 million refugees from Syria compared to its 4.5 million inhabitants, which has destabilized the country politically, religiously, and economically. We can see what the effects are. So we have to learn from all this in Europe, because we see that the situation is very unstable, very dynamic. In Israel itself, the situation is slowly but steadily returning to normal. It is safe here at the moment, although empty. Few tourists are choosing to travel to the Holy Land this year, as last year, because of the conflict. What will happen next? Everyone is waiting. At the moment, the hotels are practically not working. Tourist transportation is not working. Of course, the tickets are empty. I encourage the more adventurous to come and see how pleasant it is to visit Israel at this moment, as all the places are available, open daily, and functioning despite the lack of tourists. And it's also a very real loss to the economy, on both sides, of the bloody, devastating conflict in the Middle East.
That's the news. Thank you for watching. And from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.